So I kind of wanted to go over some of the stuff from today that we missed. Also kind of show you an example of the homework. So I'm going to start with that first. So if you're like, I got it, I read the notes, I don't need to watch the video. This is kind of what I want to see. You got a melody, you got a chord progression. The chord progression, the chords are inverted. I got a root note bass line going on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can make it a little taller just so you can see it a little bit better, like that. But what I've done, that's just my mic, don't worry about it. I've got my Roman numerals, I've got my non-chord tones, and what I'm doing is as I create the melody and I look back at it and I analyze it, I'm saying, okay, that note is an escape tone as an example. This is a neighboring tone, this is an anticipation, passing tone, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to label it where it is so I know without a doubt what you are trying to do. Remember, it's all about intention, clarity. Keep your intention as clear as possible. As far as the chords, what I'm doing here is this is the 1 chord, this is the flat 6. I'm adding the flats in there, right? Because we're starting to borrow chords. We're starting to think more about parallel harmony. So you kind of need to make a differentiation. Because I've got a flat 3, then in this measure, I got a flat 7, and I change that to a 7, meaning it goes from a B flat as the root to a B natural as the root. So check it out. Listen to it once, and then I'll go through all these different examples of non-chord tones. So that's kind of what I want to see with your homework, right? You know, follow the instructions as is, but that's the basic idea behind the analyzation of what you're doing. To be able to do that, you just got to zoom in enough, and then you can add MIDI clips that are that size, you know, showing me what the notes are. So I'm going to switch over to session view now. So I kind of want to walk through a bunch of different types of non-chord tones and why we even care, right? So I have this first clip, which is an ARP. Let's focus on the melody. So all the notes in this melody are chord tones, right? None of them are not. And that's cool, that's fine, that's interesting, I suppose. But you'll notice that when you play all the notes in the chords, there's not a lot of tension that's being created. You're sort of just adding a little bit of rhythmic activation to your harmony. But if your melody has notes that are not necessarily in the chord at that moment, we call these non-chord tones, non-harmonic tones, embellishing tones, a few other names for them. That makes for a really interesting melody because you're creating tension, then you're resolving that tension. And what we're really trying to do is to learn how to add those and understand how to approach them and leave them in ways that make it sound good. That's basically it. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the neighboring tone, and I'm going to use lower neighboring tones first. So I'll kind of walk you through this. The basic idea is that a neighboring tone is when you start on a chord tone and then you move in one direction to a non-chord tone and then you move in the opposite direction back to where you came. In this particular case, we're moving to a lower note. I'm going to D, which is below the E flat. And then I do that all the way through the melody. I go from A flat to G, back to A flat, G to F to G. And you'll notice that sometimes they're half steps, sometimes they're whole steps. Doesn't matter, so long as they're in the scale, they are diatonic, right? You'll notice that that D is in the scale, G is in the scale, F is in the scale, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all those neighboring tones are still in the scale, so they are diatonic neighboring tones. Check it out. That's pretty effective as a melodic device. Now we'll do the opposite. We'll go to the upper neighboring tone. Now these are all diatonic as well. All these notes are in the scale. You see that one there, all of them are there. Now this is the case where we just go from a chord tone, we go up to a non-chord tone, then we go back down to where we came. Check it out. And now we'll go to chromatic neighboring tones. Now, not all of these are chromatic. This one's chromatic, and this one is diatonic, and these are interesting. These are actually passing tones, right? This is an escape tone, so we're moving from a passing tone to escape tone back down to a chord tone. So there's some more interesting stuff going on here, but the ones that I really want you to focus on are these two. So check it out. more exotic because we're using a note that's not in the scale, but still effective potentially. We'll come back to this maybe in another week because there's some really interesting combo moves you can do with these. So now I'm going to talk about something different. These are called passing tones. Now, passing tones are when you approach in one direction and then you leave it in the same direction. So you're moving through it or passing through it. Now, the key about neighboring tones and passing tones is that they are stepwise motion. We're not leaping at all, right? So check it out. And some other fun stuff in here. I've got the passing tone, chord tone, non-chord tone, chord tone. Here I have an accented passing tone. So you'll notice that this one is on the 2 or the second beat out of these 4 beats, but this is on the first beat. So this is accented in this measure. And then I have a really interesting thing here. This is another kind of double passing, the double non-chord tone, where I have a chord tone, and I go to like a lower neighbor, right? But then rather than go back to a chord tone, I go to the upper neighbor right after that, which we call a changing tone or changing tones. Then here, I've got 2 passing tones in a row, so double passing tones again, and then the rest is chord tones. So with all that being said, here's all my non-chord tones. Check it out. So again, notes that are not in the chords, but they are in the scale, and they make for really interesting melodic motion. They create and resolve tension, right? This is what we're trying to get out of understanding this stuff. So now I'm going to do a chromatic passing tone, which is kind of fun. In this particular case, it's actually not really entirely a passing tone in that sense because we're actually doing kind of like a double passing tone. So, I mean, it technically is, yeah, but like I'm not landing on a chord tone here. And in fact, it's a little bit difficult to do that. Like this is a contrived example. So we've got this double passing tone. One of them is chromatic. One of them is diatonic. You got the diatonic passing tone here. You've got a lower neighboring tone there. You've got, actually, this one's kind of interesting because we're doing like a passing tone to a non-chord tone. You might be able to make the case that this is a 7th, right? Depending on what the chord is. I don't think it is in this case, though. And then everything else is the same as usual. Now, this is, I don't think sounds good. I just wanted to come up with a chromatic passing tone example in a very short time. So I'll try to come up with a better one. But the idea behind passing tones is you're going through something, right? Neighboring tones, you're going from something to somewhere different, but you're coming back home again. Like going to your neighbor's house, I guess. The next one is a reaching tone. So a reaching tone is when you're on a chord tone, then you leap to a non-chord tone, then move back by step. I've also got a couple of passing tones. I've got another reaching tone here, another passing tone. So all my non-chord tones, reaching tone, accented passing tone, or appoggiatura, another name for that. Another accented passing tone, another reaching tone, another passing tone. Check it. Now the opposite of that is going to be the escape tone. So an escape tone is when you start on a chord tone, you move to by step to a non-chord tone, then you leap to another chord tone. I got a neighboring tone here, and I got a new one here. This is called an anticipation. That means I'm going to play that note early before it happens, right? So we got our escape tone, upper neighboring tone, anticipation happening before it happens in time, and then we got another passing tone over here. Check it. Kind of fun getting into anticipations and suspensions, which is the next one. So let's check this out. So I've got another appoggiatura, aka accented non-chord tone. In this case, we're not really passing or neighboring because we're not starting anywhere. We're starting the very beginning of the measure on that note. So you could just call it an accented non-chord tone, right? There's really no definition. People would usually use something like appoggiatura in this case, right? And then we've got a lower neighboring tone. We've got a passing. Actually, no, this one's, I think technically it's leaping, right? Leaping to a chord tone. That would be an escape tone. And then we've got this, right? So what I'm doing here is this is my chord tone, but yet I am playing this note. this note is from the previous measure. What I'm doing is saying I'm going to go to this eventually, but I kind of want to suspend this note in time a little bit. So we call this a suspension. Then I got another passing tone here. So if we look at this, we got this guy, we got this one, we got this one, we got that one's kind of cool. We got this passing tone right there. Check it out. Now you could theoretically call that an anticipation too, I suppose, because it's anticipating the G, but then it doesn't resolve to the G. I'll have to think about that. This might be an example of one of those cases where the theory as it's known from quite a while ago is a bit inadequate to kind of describe some of the more modern techniques. But let me look that up. There might be a cool thing for that. I'm just not sure of at the moment. And now the last one I want to do is this one, just another suspension anticipation. So we got a passing tone, another unaccented passing tone. Here's another suspension that goes up. And then we got another suspension going down and an anticipation. So unaccented passing tone or just passing tone, suspension that resolves upwards, another suspension that resolves downward, and an anticipation that resolves into the note that's coming. Check it out. Cool. So I hope this makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to go through a bunch of examples of these so you understand how they're defined, what they look like, how you can combine them together. I just did this very quickly, so they're a bit contrived, and they're not. Some of them I could tweak a bit, but I hope that makes sense. And going back to the homework, just to reiterate, when you are making your chord progression and you've got your melody, you go through and you analyze it from that perspective. But I definitely recommend writing your chord progression, then writing your melody on top of your chords so you can see those relationships, and then clearly labeling it with little empty MIDI clips where those passing tones, those neighboring tones, whatever they are, happen to be. You don't have to necessarily say upper neighboring tone if you don't want to. I mean, if you say neighboring tone, I get what you mean. This is an anticipation, A-N-T, escape tone, E-T, passing tone, P-T, etc., etc. Here's my chords. I'm using the flats now because I have 2 7s, so I need to differentiate between which one is flat 7, which one is 7, if that's the case, right? So getting used to that at this point would be a good idea. So I hope this all makes sense. Your homework should look like this. Also on the template that you're given, there's another analysis file. So it's a chord progression that's been made, and they want you to analyze that. That's part 2. If you have questions about that, let me know. But basically, you go through it, you look at it, you figure out what the chords are, analyze the melody, figure out any notes that should sort of highlight, and that's what's going on. So be mindful of that. Try to do both of those things. That's all part of your homework. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I will help you as best I can. With that being said, I hopefully enjoyed the video, and like, subscribe, I don't know what YouTubers say. Anyway, peace. I'll see you in class.